So we've looked at the issue of myth, and we've explained by Dr. Baucham's work. You can read in Jesus and the Eyewitness, Jesus and the Eyewitnesses, the Gospels as Eyewitness Testimony, Richard Bauckham, 2006, Erdman. You can read his book on that. You mentioned how do we differentiate between myth and other information. I've just showed you that the genre of the Gospels is quite clearly eyewitness material, okay, which is different from myth, because myth is over a long period of time and makes no claim to historiography in that way. We also I have 3 examples. You mentioned yourself about the Hindu scriptures and what's the difference between them and the Gospels. Again, the Gospels are based on eyewitness accounts. Within the lifetime after Jesus, there were disciples alive who were custodians of the eyewitness material of Jesus and passed that on. And within the period of the eyewitnesses, the Gospels were written from 70 to 90 AD. I think it was written earlier, but if we just go for general scholarship, so they're written within 40 years of Jesus' death and resurrection. Whereas you mentioned the Hindu religion and the Vedas, you have a large number of Veda scriptures. You have volume 1 of the Samhitas, volume 2 the Brahmans, Aranyakasis, volume 3 the Upanishads, and the volume 4 you have the Vedangas. Okay, but it's happened, these Veda scriptures of the Hindus was over 1,000 years of oral tradition before they were actually written down. So you've got 1,000 years of oral tradition where over that 1,000 years information would have changed. Whereas you have in the Gospels, it's over 40, maybe 50 years of oral tradition, but based on eyewitness accounts. So there's a big difference. 40 years before, and then something's written down, to 1,000 years before something's written down. So you can't compare the Veda scripture for historical veracity as compared to the Gospels. Another example is the Gnostic Gospels. If you look at the Gospel of Thomas, and you have a read of the Gospel of Thomas, in verse 37 of the Gospel of Thomas, clearly you find Mithra methodology. You find the Gnostic word secret used. Verse 7 you have Mithra kind of cultus. So the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas is influenced, as far as I can see, from Mithraism. And what that means is, if you look at the history of Mithraism, so in the Gospel of Thomas there's virtually hardly anything, if not anything, that has any historical veracity concerning the details of Christ's life. So you cannot compare the Gnostic Gospels to the 4 Gospels. But quite clearly the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas is influenced by Mithraism. It's interesting to know, if you look at over 1,000 years of Mithraism, there is no literature like the Gospels. There's no 4 Gospels or 5 Gospels or 6 Gospels in Mithraism. And that is significant, because in Mithraism there's no emphasis on historiography and historical data and eyewitness accounts. And so you have over 1,000 years of a religion that is significant in the Roman Empire, that was all over the Roman Empire, and yet had no emphasis on eyewitness accounts and historical and the way ancient historians wanted to do history. When we find from Herodotus, Book 1, Chapter 31, others are accustomed to ascend to the hilltops and sacrifice to Zeus. That's about Mithraism in 5th century BC. We read in Lucian 120 to 200 AD, in Gods and Councils, chapter 9, out of consideration for him, I suppose I must also abstain from any reference to the eagle, which is now a god like the rest of us, perched upon the royal scepter. And he talks about the various washings and the kind of religious workings going on in Mithraism during his day in the surrounding areas of Persia and other places where Mithraism was strong. So basically, when you look at Herodotus, Lucian, and many other writers that wrote about Mithraism, and you look at all the historians that wrote over 1,000 years, you find that Mithraism changed in the time of Persia, and it was different in the time of the Roman Empire, and virtually there is very little written documentary information by the Mithras themselves. Only a few fragments of their hymns. All the information that we get is from historians or commentators outside Mithraism. What that tells you is Mithraism was not interested in producing historical, reliable material, because they produced none. Whereas the Gospels were very concerned about doing ancient historiography. We read, for example, in the Gospel of Luke, we read these words: Most honourable Theophilus, many people have written accounts about the events that took place among us. They used as their source material the reports circulating among us from early disciples and other eyewitnesses of what God has done in fulfillment of his promises. Having carefully investigated all of these accounts from the beginning, I have decided to write a careful summary for you to reassure you of the truth of all you were taught. So there we get exactly the way ancient historians did historiography, stated by the Gospel writer of Luke. And we get nothing like that claim or any examples or anything of any literary significance from the myth religion that spanned the time of Christianity, before, during and after. So we can differentiate on the issue of what is myth and what is history by comparing them and understanding the way the scriptures have come about and what they saw the scriptures are. The second issue is, you mentioned about the existence of God, that there is no evidence for the existence of God. I would like to read you these words by physicist Paul Davies. It is hard to resist the impression that the present structure of the universe, apparently so sensitive in minor alterations in number, has been rather carefully thought out. The seemingly miraculous concurrence of these numerous values must remain the most compelling evidence for cosmic design. And we write, Robin Collins, PhD, says, Robin Collins sent away for several free booklets from the Atomic Energy Commission as a boy, and a love for physics was born. He went on to earn degrees in physics mathematics at Washington State University with a grade point average of 0.07 points, shy of perfection. Then entered a doctoral program in physics at the University of Texas, Houston. He says, when scientists talk about fine-tuning of the universe, says Collins, they're generally referring to the extraordinary balance of the fundamental laws and the parameters of physics and the initial conditions of the universe. Our minds can't comprehend the precision of some of them. The result is a universe that has just the right conditions to sustain life. The coincidences are simply too amazing to have been the result of happenstance or chance. As Paul Davies said, the impression of design is overwhelming. So the fine-tune argument is just good enough evidence to show that there is a God, but that's just a cop-out. we are trying to look at details of information about Jesus from a historian point of view. So arguments for the existence of God or non-existence of God, either way, we can present arguments, you can present arguments, but you've still got to come back to doing history. You've still got to look at the historical data, and that's what you've not done yet so far. But there are many arguments that we can give for the existence of God, and we can give scientific information as well. The third issue you brought up is miracles. You said miracles have never been proven. We don't have a criteria for proving miracles. Well, you as a skeptic need to provide a criteria. What criteria have you provided? It's interesting to note that skeptics will not provide criteria. So if you don't provide a criteria to investigate miracles, how can you say miracles don't exist? David Hume provided a criteria for investigating miracles, and he applied it to the time of Pascal. Catholics that were having miracle experiences in the time of Pascal in France. And when he applied his criteria, he found that the miracles fitted his criteria, but he still didn't believe that they were miracles. So even when a criteria is presented and the miracles fit the criteria, a skeptic still didn't believe. But you need to provide a criteria and show why miracles don't fit your criteria. You haven't done that. You've made an assertion without any evidence to back up. There is evidence for miracles. If you read a book by Craig S. Keener of Baker Academics 2011, he presents a lot of scientific information that miracles have taken place. But he writes one or two important things. He says, human experience necessitates metaphysical as well as scientific language. The language describes different aspects of existence and not intrinsically contradictory. Page 91. In your video, you're talking about empirical evidence, and that's because you as a Westerner have a particular bias for your anti-supernaturalism. What Keener is saying is human experience is much richer than just our Western concept of what epistemology and knowledge is. And I think that we have to recognize that other cultures around the world have experiences, and they use language that expands that experience different from the way you would see it as your Western cultural elite enlightenment perspective. Secondly, Keener also noted the so-called confidence between science and miracles. Ian Ramsey observed, he said, is a pseudo-conflict which only arises when complete adequacy is claimed for the language of science. In other words, you make a dichotomy between science and the supernatural. But that is a dichotomy that has been created epistemologically since the Enlightenment, and that dichotomy doesn't need to be there, because ultimately, when a miracle, or if a miracle is to take place, science cannot arbitrate ultimately on whether that miracle has taken place or not. It's taken place in a historical dimension, and therefore requires historical investigation. And you need to be willing to be open to the possibility, as a historian, to investigate historical claims. He writes, neutrality regarding God's existence means that historians in the public role must allow miracles are indeed a possibility, rather than ripping it out as a priori. Historians must be cautious about reports of unusual and supernatural events. They are not, however, obliged as historians to rule them out. So, your argument against miracles doesn't really work, because at the end of the day, as a historian, you come to the material objectively. You come not believing in miracles or against miracles. You just look at the historical data. But if you're saying as a naturalist miracles can't happen, you're already coming with a biased perspective, and you're not going to look at the historical evidence in a fair way. So your argument fails because it's not being neutral as a historian. That's my point. Also, I'll make one last point and then I'll finish.